What if I told you one collapse was so brutal it still haunts the NHL years later? 2021, empty arenas, a world still in chaos. And somehow the Toronto Maple Leafs and Montreal Canadiens were meeting in the playoffs for the first time in over 40 years. The Leafs were stacked and expected to cruise. The Habs were written off. But standing in net was a 34-year-old Carey Price, about to deliver one last masterpiece. This wasn't just an upset, it became the collapse that scarred a franchise already drowning in ghosts. The 2020-21 NHL season was chaos. Just 56 games, temporary divisions, and for the first time ever, all 7 Canadian teams shoved into one North Division. The Leafs thrived, looking like cup favorites. The Canadiens stumbled to a middling record, barely squeaking into the playoffs. Analysts laughed off their chances, but in the middle of injuries, coaching changes, and doubt, Montreal had one thing Toronto didn't: Carey Price, ready to write his final masterpiece. Montreal actually started the season hot. A 7-1-2 record had fans buzzing about an unlikely contender, but then came the injuries. Carey Price missed significant time. Shea Weber battled through pain. Jonathan Drouin stepped away for personal reasons. The optimism disappeared fast. The Canadiens slid down the standings, and the scapegoat became head coach Claude Julien. He was fired mid-season, replaced by Dominique Ducharme. The new coaching staff didn't overhaul everything, but they did make one key adjustment: a shift to the 1-1-3 neutral zone trap. It was a conservative system designed to clog the middle of the ice and neutralize fast break offenses. Analysts scoffed. "That kind of defense won't work in modern hockey," they said. "Teams will pick it apart." For Toronto, there were no excuses. This was it, their best chance in decades. The Leafs finished first in the North Division, 7th in the entire NHL. They were balanced, deadly, and motivated. Their top guns, Austin Matthews, fresh off a 41-goal season, and Mitch Marner, a playmaking wizard, had led one of the league's most explosive offenses. Add in John Tavares, William Nylander, and a deep supporting cast, and the path to the Cup seemed wide open. Toronto's system was built for modern hockey. They ran a 2-3 offensive setup, keeping a forward high to generate space and puck movement. It was the same structure Tampa Bay had used to win the Cup in the bubble. With the Leafs' talent, it was devastating. They led the league in scoring chances off the rush. Analysts saw them as unstoppable. When the matchup with Montreal was confirmed, the predictions were brutal. Habs don't have a chance. Maybe they can steal one game. Some didn't even give them that. And for Toronto, the pressure was clear. This wasn't just about winning a round. This was about finally shaking the demons of years past. Game 7 heartbreaks against Boston, blown leads, constant disappointment. The Leafs were supposed to bury the ghosts here against their oldest rival and set the tone for a deep playoff run. But instead, those ghosts only got louder. The series opened in Toronto. No fans in the stands, just the eerie silence of playoff hockey in a pandemic. But excitement still buzzed. Leafs versus Habs in the playoffs? It was history. Then, 10 minutes into Game 1, disaster struck. John Tavares, Toronto's captain, was hit, fell awkwardly, and collided with Corey Perry's knee. The scene was horrifying. Tavares lay motionless, stretchered off the ice, leaving both teams shaken. Players looked on in shock. Fans watching at home felt sick. The Leafs lost more than just their leader in that moment. They lost their composure. Minutes later, Josh Anderson capitalized off a turnover, putting Montreal ahead. Toronto answered with a Nylander goal, but Carey Price was already in playoff mode, turning away chance after chance. Then came the dagger, a shorthanded goal by Paul Byron, who dangled through defenders and roofed it on Campbell. Montreal stole Game 1, but nobody thought it mattered. Leafs fans chalked it up to the Tavares injury, a fluke. Analysts doubled down. Toronto still got this. And at first, it looked like they were right. Toronto stormed back. Game 2, Nylander scored again, really sealed it. Leafs tied the series. Game 3, tight, 2-1 win for Toronto. Game 4, blowout. Leafs crushed Montreal 4-0. Just like that, the Leafs were up 3-1. The balance of power had shifted. Matthews and Marner weren't dominating, but Toronto's depth was. Carey Price was brilliant, but even he couldn't stop the barrage forever. At this point, the series looked over. Montreal was dead in the water, but cracks were forming. Cracks nobody noticed. Toronto's top stars were quiet. The power play was ice cold. Matthews and Marner combined for just 2 points in the first 4 games. The pressure to deliver was mounting. Still, the narrative was simple. Toronto was going to finish this. One more win and the ghosts would be gone. Except those ghosts were just waiting to pounce. Game 5 was the moment everything changed. Toronto came out flat, hesitant, and sloppy. Montreal pounced. By the halfway point of the game, the Canadiens had built a shocking 3-0 lead. Leafs fans watched in horror. Was this really happening? But then, Toronto fought back. Nylander scored, Spezza scored, Riley scored. Suddenly, it was 3-3. The momentum had shifted, and then came overtime. Former Hab Alex Galchenyuk, now a Leaf, tried to force a pass at the blue line. It was picked off. In seconds, Caulfield and Suzuki were on a 2-on-0. Suzuki buried it. Game over. Montreal wins. The Habs had life. The Leafs had doubt, and history whispered, not again. The Bell Center finally opened its doors for Game 6 with a limited number of fans in attendance, and those fans made themselves heard. The Leafs, feeling the pressure, looked tense. Carey Price looked calm, unbothered. Then Mitch Marner made a mistake he'll never forget. On the penalty kill, he tried to clear the puck, but instead flipped it over the glass. Delay of game. Montreal went to the power play, and they struck twice. The Leafs managed to tie it late, forcing overtime, but fate was already decided. Jesperi Kotkaniemi scored in overtime, and Montreal had forced Game 7. May 31st, 2021, Game 7, Toronto, 500 frontline workers in the stands, and the weight of an entire franchise on the ice. The Leafs came out strong. They fired chance after chance at Carey Price, but nothing went in. Every shot was swallowed, every rebound smothered. Price looked like he had traveled back in time, channeling his prime. Then it happened. A turnover by Marner. Brendan Gallagher buried it. 1-0 Montreal. Toronto deflated. Montreal sat back, structured, waiting for more mistakes. And they came. Corey Perry added another on the power play. By the third period, the collapse was inevitable. The Leafs got one late, but it was too little. Too late. Final buzzer. 3-1 Montreal. Series over. The Canadiens celebrated. The Leafs hung their heads. And another chapter of heartbreak was written in Toronto's cursed history. But the numbers told an even darker story. Here's the crazy part. Statistically, Toronto should have won. Expected goals, possession, shot quality, the Leafs dominated. In fact, in games 5 and 6, Toronto massively outplayed Montreal. Their expected goals percentage was through the roof, north of 70% at times. But it didn't matter, because every slow start dug a hole too deep to climb out of. And Carey Price erased whatever advantage Toronto created. For a franchise obsessed with analytics, this was the ultimate nightmare. The spreadsheet said the Leafs were better. The eye test said they were cursed. And when the pressure mounted, execution collapsed. The numbers didn't lie. Yep, but they didn't save Toronto either. For Montreal, this was the spark of a Cinderella run. They swept the Jets. They stunned the Vegas Golden Knights. They made it all the way to the Stanley Cup final before falling to Tampa Bay. It was magical, fueled by Carey Price's brilliance. For Toronto, it was a scar that hasn't healed. Matthews and Marner became lightning rods for criticism. Management doubled down, refusing to blow up the core, insisting it was bad luck, not failure. But year after year, the story stayed the same. Playoff collapses, Game 7 heartbreak, stars who couldn't deliver when it mattered most. And that's why this series still matters, because it wasn't just another collapse. It was the collapse that exposed the soul of a franchise. Looking back, it's hard to believe. A team with as much talent as Toronto had, against a Montreal squad barely limping into the playoffs, should have been an easy win. But hockey isn't played on spreadsheets. It's played on ice, under pressure, with demons whispering in the ears of players who have everything to lose. For Montreal, it was a miracle run led by Carey Price's last stand. For Toronto, it was a collapse that still defines them years later. Maybe it wasn't just one loss. Maybe it was the moment that showed us who the Leafs really are when it matters most. Let me know in the comments if you think that Toronto can finally show up in the playoffs this year.